I never forget a face, speak up. I never forget any face.
Leave me alone, brother. I've never seen you before.
This is the poisonous young swine that near turned me in.
What's that?
I said there's an attempt to overthrow capitalism, but it's formed into a totalitarian regime, and I think what we need is democratic socialism. We have a planned economy, but also democracy. I don't think it's inevitable that sort of thing will happen.
But they tried it in Soviet Union, they failed, right? They tried it in Vietnam, it failed.
I don't think they really
China,
tried it. I don't really think they tried it, right?
So you think that if you try again, you're going to succeed this time around?
The masses' asses were huddled in the park. They were the 99%, and some of them had shot. Woe is me is set to jubilee, at where we shall always meet or part. Our job in Community Echo Bravo 17 was to pick up sticks. I picked up a stick. Rick did not. This pissed me off. I said, Rick, will you not pick up a stick? Or will we have to send you to Camp Gulag for the education? In Rick's eyes, for a tiny moment, there flashed a look of intense hatred, but he quickly disguised it and even began to scurry around picking off sticks when we heard that awful steely sound of a round being chambered nearby. Oh, give a man the motivations.
I've taught you much, my little droogies. Now tell me what you had in mind, Georgie boy.
Oh, the old Moloko Plus first, would you not
Plus,
say?
Eh?
He's something to sharpen us up.
Some of the Moloko Plus.
But you especially, we have the start.
Yeah, you got first, because we've got start on you. Yeah, Moloko Plus, eh? Yeah.
Francisco. That's okay. I was bored anyway. I left my love in a field.
Stop breaking the state's peace, morning, boys. Back away. All away with you. What's the trouble, sir? Oh, no. Well. 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 Well, 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 well. Well, well, well. Well, 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 well. Well, well, well.
If you look at the history,
I did. I
know.
lived through history. Not just look, but I
you weren't
lived.
around in the Russian Revolution, and neither was I, right?
Russian Revolution?
Yeah,
You use
1917.
Russian Revolution as an example. Do the word red terror ring the bell?
They would open a prisoner's belly, take out the small intestine, and nailing it to a tree or telegraph pole, they drove the man around the tree with blows, watching the intestine unwinding through the wound. Stripping a captured officer naked, they tore strips of skin from his shoulders in the form of shoulder straps. A terrible fear fell over Russia, but the communist savagery had only just begun.
The realities of human
we're all
nature.
greedy. I've heard
So-
this argument over and over and over again. And
Right.
I don't believe that humans are inherently greedy.
Cheka officers descended on villages all over Russia and began rounding up peasants' crops and livestock at gunpoint. A quota to be handed over by every peasant and given to the Bolsheviks was drawn up. In order to meet that quota, most of them had to give up all that they possessed. Peasants who protested were silenced by the most savage means. On 14 February 1922, one inspector who visited the Omsk region wrote, "Abuses of position by the requisitioning detachments, frankly speaking, have now reached unbelievable levels. Systematically, the peasants who are arrested are all locked up in big, unheated barns. They are then whipped and threatened with execution. Those who have not filled the whole of their quota are bound and forced to run naked all along the main street of the village and then locked up in another unheated hangar. Lenin was enraged when he realized that the quota set for the villages would not be met. In 1920, he inflicted a fearful punishment on some regions that had resisted the requisitions. Not only would these peasants' crops be seized, but also all the seeds they possessed. Confiscating the seeds meant that the peasants would be unable to produce a new crop. In other words, they would have nothing to eat. Then the famine began. 29 million people within the borders of Russia battled with starvation. In 1921 and 1922, 5 million starved agonizingly to death.
I think if you look at the real history of the Soviet
Okay.
Union, the Russian Revolution,
Okay.
you'll find that that was, for the first time, working people in 1917 did come to power in incredibly difficult conditions, torn by war, isolated, underdeveloped, and the whole way that socialism will work, just like capitalism, is that it needs to become a global system. And in other words, that the revolution would have had to spread. In the revolution, there was attempts of working people in other countries, in Germany and other European countries, to take power. They failed to do what the Bolsheviks did. The Soviet Union remained isolated, underdeveloped, and those conditions allowed for the degeneration of that revolution.
Lenin watched what was happening with enormous pleasure. In his view, the famine was most useful. He calculated that it would help to destroy people's belief in God and religion and make them bow their heads to communism. In the Black Book of Communism that sent shockwaves around the world, that devilish idea of Lenin's is discussed thus. As one of his friends later recalled, Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov had the courage to come out and say openly that famine would have numerous positive results. Famine, he explained, would bring about the next stage more rapidly and usher in socialism, the stage that necessarily followed capitalism. Famine would also destroy faith not only in the Tsar, but in God too. This is what Lenin wrote to the members of the Politburo on March 19, 1922. The present moment favors us. With the help of all those starving people who are starting to eat each other, who are dying by the millions, and whose bodies litter the roadside all over the country, it is now and only now that we can and therefore must confiscate all church property with all the ruthless energy we can muster. Our only hope is the despair engendered in the masses by the famine, which will cause them to look at us in a favorable light, or, at the very least, with indifference. These communications in the Soviet archives have revealed that Lenin deliberately brought about that dreadful famine which cost 5 million lives. That is the same conclusion arrived at by the historian Richard Pipes, who spent years researching the archives in his book, The Unknown Lenin. In his view, for humankind at large, Lenin had nothing but scorn. Individual human beings held for Lenin almost no interest, and he treated the working class much as a metal worker treated iron ore. Not only did Lenin regard human beings as a species of animal, he also employed animal methods to train them. In October 1919, he paid a personal visit to the Russian scientists Ivan Pavlov, famous for his conditioned reflex experiments on animals. Lenin wanted to impose these conditioned reflex methods on the whole of Russian society. Pavlov was astounded. "I want the masses of Russia to follow a communistic pattern of thinking and reacting," Lenin explained. Pavlov was astounded. It seemed that Lenin wanted him to do for humans what he had already done for dogs. "Do you mean that you would like to standardize the population of Russia? Make them all behave in the same way?" he asked. "Exactly," replied Lenin. "Man can be corrected. Man can be made what we want him to be." From 1922 on, an increasingly serious sickness slowly began to paralyze him. He spent most of 1923 in a wheelchair, suffering from terrible headaches. In March 1923, he had a stroke and was thenceforth unable to speak normally. In the final months of his life, those who saw Lenin were terrified. His face had taken on a peculiar expression, and he was half mad. The final photograph taken of him shortly before his death was utterly ghastly.
And I don't think you can just simplistically put forward these examples in history and say that shows, that proves that it can't work.
You are at the height of your game, aren't you? Would you not say that you agree, baby? You got your grip all fine-tuned and sparkling. Yeah, you got your board look all worked out. You are all in line.
live in a system which encourages and rewards people being cutthroat and individualistic and greedy. And if we had a system that was based on cooperation...
But how do you plan on actually achieving that? I mean, that's something that keeps surprising me. I mean, nice words, Marx, Engels. I see books on Marx and Engels. I mean, it always failed. Lenin was based on Marx and Engels, right? Mao Zedong, same thing. They all claim to be Marxist Leninists, but they all failed. And they were following allegedly the same precepts, the same recipes which Marx and Engels espoused. No, so that's why, you know, to be honest with you, I'm really surprised.
The answer to that thing you hate is not to embrace it in a revamped form. Give a hooker a makeover and she is still a whore. Essentially, they are conning you to jettison even the concept of capitalism, which in its purest sense is simply the exchange of goods and services, an inherently value-based economy and the groundwork for any system to be found outside of tyranny, leading you to believe that it is capitalism which is to blame when in fact we are, as citizens, the brave new global empire, under corporate fascist implemented state-backed socialism, in other words, anything but actual capitalism, and to throw away the founding documents of this country as irrelevant, when in fact they are the last speed bumps to all-out global tyranny. Why do you think they are so passionately after your guns? And embrace a system of global, state-backed, jackbooted socialist tyranny that will, given the state of modern man, make the Red Terror fallout after the Russian Revolution look like child's play in comparison.
For us, we don't think that this system is working for working people. You know, with the mass unemployment, with huge budget cuts, war, environmental destruction, we see a continued crisis rooted in the system, a crisis of capitalism, global capitalism.
And where did socialism succeed, I wonder?
Well, it's not really a question of where. The point is that capitalism isn't working, right? And we need to come up to...
But you want to replace it with socialism, right?
Well, I want to replace it, yeah.
You may think that what's going on in this country is capitalism, but it's not. It's not. It's corporate fascism.
That's why the corporations implementing the agenda point at capitalism or socialism as the ills, depending if your politics are left or right.
Corporate fascism mixed in with socialism because they're cousins. That's the dirty little secret. Corporate fascism is a form of socialism, and socialism inevitably devolves into corporate fascism given the inherent ruthless, self-serving, power-driven nature of man. The state is that corporation. Centralized governments and centralized banks working hand in hand with their people interchanging posts between the two. Looking at their background.
Of those on the boards of the Federal Reserve and Council on Foreign Relations.
If you doubt this. In our country, those globalist social engineers who own the major banks, financial institutions, and corporations have their people in every key post in our government. Therefore, we are already a corporate fascist socialist state in the global empire. Have been for over 100 years now, since the globalists got their people to infiltrate our government and passed the Federal Reserve Act, establishing a central bank, which was warned against by all the patriots in the history of our country prior to that point. This was the equivalent of burning the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to the ground and renders the rest of the political process a ludicrous sham. But it's entertaining, like professional wrestling. The only difference nowadays is the disguise is dropping, the varnish is coming off, and the aims are more plainly to be seen. Every 4 years we get to choose between the liberal or the conservative flavor of leadership the global empire has chosen for us to give us the illusion that we still, to some degree, guide our own fate. They grunt and growl menacingly at each other in front of the cameras and then high-five in the back room for a good show. Well done.
My best unbeaten brother, this isn't all I see. Oh no, I see a darkness know how much I love you is a hope that somehow you can save me from this darkness.
They even allow some hopeful types to run in the primaries in order to better sell the illusion of choice. But these two are hopeless even if they were allowed the nomination, because they're trying to change the system by the system, running inside the two-party sham, and you will never be allowed to beat the game on house money. Beelzebub is not cast out by Beelzebub. Therefore, any person who has not figured this out by this late date, after obviously controlled election in this country, and doesn't trace the real power back through the money feed and runs on one of the two-party tickets instead of trying to start a truly independent movement, is inherently suspect. They might not be controlled, but they are too ignorant of reality to lead this country to where it needs to go. If getting back to the founder's vision and the eternal moral law of God is where we ought to go. If Belial, the author of confusion and the sons of madness, is the desired outcome, then hitch on up. The end result between facilitating the devil's agenda through ignorance or outright compliance is the same. So it is that the plebes, like an Arctic wolf licking the blade a hunter has stuck in the ice and drinking its own blood, thinking it is receiving nourishment, are conned into destroying themselves. And when you expose the reality of their world to them, they hiss and spit at you like you are the bad guy, even though it is their insistence on being conned that is what actually dooms us all to perpetual servitude inside the controlled paradigm. You have offered them no hope, and the blinking screen offers it in spades, like pills for your ills and plastic surgery to give you that elusive, perfect you always envisioned. The whore of utopia beckons. Run with her now.
Probably do the same thing to my dear. Baby, you where dreams go to die, and I regret the day your lovely carcass caught my eye. Baby, you where dreams go to die, and I've gotta get away. I don't want to, but I have to try. Oh baby.
In politics, one side argues for its own ideal and against the failures in the real world working out of the other side's policies, and vice versa. The constant equivocation between the ideal and the reality is also what the elites have used in order to maintain the illusion that the reality we live under of their global beast system, which has hijacked the government of this country and subverted it in diametric opposition to its founding principles, is actually the original government itself, even if thought to be a diseased form of the same, when in fact the two have as much in common as death and life. It is the same equivocation and lack of discernment that allows many to view the Pope as Christian, the Kabbalist occultists who have sold out their race as the Jewish people, Big Ag as farming, Big Pharma as healthcare, the public school system as education, the global beast system as the same as the Republic it has hijacked, the gold-fringed flag of British Naval Admiralty displayed in the beast system courts and government meeting places as Old Glory, and we, the flesh and blood, spirit, soul, and mind human beings named by our parents when we came out the womb, sovereign beings created by the sovereign God with inalienable rights, as the all-caps fictions in the beast system database, whose quote-unquote rights are dictated to it by the state. Are you able to conceive of the depth and breadth and scope of the deception? Do you start to see how it is that the God of this world, the devil, has counterfeited everything that was based on the original intent God ordained for and instilled into his creation? Do you begin to see the deep meaning behind what Christ told the Pharisees in John 8:44? Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar, and the father of it. And then he told him, and because I tell you the truth, ye believe me not.
You where dreams go to die, and I regret the day your lovely carcass caught my eye, baby. You where dreams go to die, and I've gotta get away. I don't want to, but I have to try.
It's the Bible telling us how things are going to be for those who are not loving the world and compromising with the world. These are the things that are going to distinguish God's people, and always have distinguished God's people from the rest of society. We've always talked about America being a Christian country, but in a biblical sense, it's not really possible for a country to be Christian. It's individuals who are Christians because of their commitment to the Lord Jesus Christ, and a government by nature doesn't really have that kind of capacity for commitment. Where Christians are a majority, we always used to think then that sort of helped us along living according to Christian values, but we don't live in a pure democracy in this country where majority rules. We were reminded this past week that there was some kind of petition or word or something going around the high school about a certain issue. It doesn't have anything to do with religion. It was whether they were going to wear green and white gowns for graduation like they always have. I think the guys wore green and the gals wore white at graduation, and someone started a petition or something to say it needs to be all one or the other, because it's degrading to somebody to have to wear a color that they don't want to wear. And so they decided, just unilaterally decided, that they're just going to go with all green. And 1,000 people can say we want both. One person can complain and change the way we do things. And when you talk about Christian values, that's kind of the same way it is now. If 1,000 people want to have prayer before the football game and one person complains, they won't have prayer. So this isn't a democracy. I'm not sure what it is anymore. I'm not sure it's a republic either, but it has become corrupted because the heart of man is corrupt. So, that's not blaming anybody particularly. It's just saying we need to get down to business as Christians and begin to be what God says we ought to be.